you've been around comics for so long and the scene for so long, and it'd be cool to get like your opinion on like how it's changed over time. And
well, I mean, this the pretty general stuff, you know. I'm sure it's not stuff that's any surprise to you. I guess the biggest transition I'd say is that it does seem like a lot of different people are able to make a much stronger living than they used to, or at least are able to bring in kind of more income on projects like that are a little more unique and special. I mean, I don't think, I was just thinking about that Tilly Walden book that came out, that first second thing.
Yeah.
And, I don't think that, 10 years ago, it's not just that she's so young and that she's a woman and all those kind of like basic general things, like just the tone of that kind of narrative. Would that have been released 10 years ago? I don't know that it would have. And if it was released, I don't think that it would have been talked about in like the high esteem that it was, partly because people would have just been like, that's a total fringe. I mean, I still think there's a lot of things like that. Like, we're so close to these little micro changes in narrative and micro changes in like the tone of a narrative and that sort of thing that I think we kind of tend to forget how big these leaps are when you look at like 10 and 20 years back. But and then there's other things too. A friend of mine actually reminded me of something just a few days ago where it's like, I think nowadays, as someone who came into this thing at a certain point, like I think there was a time when like the coolest thing you could do in a comic really was you were going to go draw Wolverine, and now I don't think anybody would call that cool anymore, except for somebody who's super far removed from the idea of cool, I mean, it's just like those things are now totally established. I mean, like that whole world of that kind of narrative is so clearly a corporate property.
Right.
That it's no longer, I mean, like it's a good paycheck. I mean, I don't think anybody's going to argue that those aren't rock solid paychecks that'll cover you for a year while you do something more interesting. But I do think that like 10, 15 years ago, people would have been like, hey man, that guy draws as a Punisher. And nowadays you'd be like, yeah, who cares?
Yeah.
It's like, it's like that guy storyboarded Storks. Like nobody's gonna be like, that's well. Like you'd be like, wow, I bet that's a really good gig. I bet storyboarding Storks like gave him enough money to cover his medical insurance for 2 years and put an extra wing on his house, But nobody's gonna be like, oh, that's so cool. You storyboarded Storks? Oh, great. You did one of those cut scenes that they put at the end of Deadpool. Wow, that you must really get into all the clubs. And that's not the case anymore. And I think that. I mean, I was really kind of inspired by the thing that you guys sent over, just about the internet and that sort of thing. And I think I would give the credit to almost wholly to the internet for kind of making it clear that like, hey, this is a corporate job, and that's, I mean, as corny as it might sound, like that's not cool. That's just a job.
Yeah.
Like, what's cool is using this art form to kind of to do whatever it is you want to do with it, to like really get into doing something interesting, and then maybe self-publishing that, or maybe publishing that with your own little hive mind, or maybe just taking it and actually like looking after your career and marketing it to like 4 or 5 different publishers and working with an agent to make sure that you're not getting screwed over. Like those kind of things, like those can all be classified under the realm of careerism, but they can also be classified under the realm of self-care. You're not gonna let somebody screw you over.
Yeah.
And I think all of those things are like have come about because the internet forced certain kinds of artists to actually start conversing with other people and realize like, hey, maybe I shouldn't, maybe this is going to not be what I want. Maybe this isn't going to give me the life that I want. And some other guy could say like, yeah, it's not going to give you the life that you want. No.
It's so interesting though, because I feel like a lot of people still talk about like, I don't know, there's like the other side of it where people are talking about like drawing 80s Storm fan art, and I think it's like super interesting. So,
yeah, I mean, that's absolutely true. There's a lot of people still kind of going like, hey, like what happens if I draw, I don't know, DC characters as the Muppet Babies? That's still
yeah. It's like, and people love Stranger Things and stuff like that, so it's like interesting that we get such a varying degree of like people really wanting to push like doing their own thing and other people really wanting to go in the other direction of like doing super corporate things. Mm-hmm. So I don't know.
Well, there's a guy. He said it privately, so I don't think I'll name drop him. But there's a guy in comics who pointed out. He said he's older than I am, but he said, if I was coming up now, if I was a teenager now, he said he had started to look at superheroes and movie, especially like movie characters too, like Leatherface and that kind of thing. And he's like, they're just kind of like brands that you'd identify with as like a youth. It doesn't really have anything to do with the fact that it's a comic or that it has a narrative behind it. And it's not really even a nostalgic pull. It's more like, this is your thing that you're into. Like you wear like Joker t-shirts. And honestly, that's, the young woman who is like our primary babysitter for my daughter.
Mm-hmm.
She's really into the Joker. Like she's, my daughter's always telling me, she's like, Kayla really likes the Joker.
Oh, wow.
Kayla doesn't.
You leave your daughter with
comics.
someone who likes the Joker?
Yeah, totally. Piper she had a lady who likes princesses, and Piper said, get that lady out of here. But
only the Joker.
Yeah, only the Joker. Like Kayla's not into comics. She's not reading Scott Snyder's Batman, and she's not reading The Killing Joke. She doesn't care about comics at all. She likes Joker T-shirts. She likes Harley Quinn crap. And I think that's like, I see a lot of that online because I do often wonder. I'm like, are you really telling me that these 17-year-olds who are like dressing up like Harley Quinn, are you really telling me that they're like reading those dumbass Batman adventures, whatever? Like, you tell me, I don't believe that they're reading this Jim Lee Suicide Squad. Nobody's reading that shit. Like, those numbers are nothing. and then they talk about comicsology. I'm like, I don't believe that anybody. I mean, that's just my feelings, and maybe I just want it to be true, but I just can't believe that. I don't believe that my babysitter I know she's not, actually, because I asked her, but they're not going to the store like once a month to be like, yo, you got that Suicide Squad? Yeah.
Really needed my hit of Suicide Squad today.
Yeah, maybe they like scrolled through the Wikipedia once, like really fast.
Yeah,
that's what I mean. I remember when I first had an office job, sitting there reading Wikipedia about Scientology, and then you read like Wikipedia about serial killers, and then you're like, what? How did like X-Men end? And then you go in there like, oh god, it's still going.
Oh, I should say, you're listening to Salt and Honey. I forgot.
No, we should do that at like the end, and we could just like, you can just move it.
They know what they're listening to.
No, they don't.
They should by now.
They're like, we listen to one episode. We don't get what your thing is about.
Yeah, what is this even? So I'm Sloane, and we are with Leslie. Say hi, Leslie.
Hi.
And we're with Tucker, our first guest.
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having me. Thanks for having me as your first guest.
Yeah. Our inaugural guest. Tucker is probably best known for being like a comics critic, and he runs the Factual Opinion, and he's on 2 podcasts, which is Comic Books for Bernie and Hill and Travis Bickle on the Riviera. Yes.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah. So movies, comics, he's got you covered.
Nice.
I'm thinking of starting a book one too.
Really?
Yeah, because I that's what when I left the store years ago, when I worked at Bergen Street Comics for 7 years, and I just kind of books like fell away, partly because I rode my bike all the time, and that eliminated that commute time. I really got back into reading prose again, which has always been that's been with me even longer than comics has. Mm-hmm. And then I was like, I would love, because I don't actually know like any book podcast. And I was like, I should just not know any. I should just start one and just do one.
I listened to like a bad one.
Yeah,
they read bad books. It's
was it about, what kind of books was it about? Was it about like genre books? Was it about like literary fiction? What was it about?
It's like teen pulp books.
Okay, yeah.
And I never read any of the books that they talk about. They just talk about them, and I like don't pay attention, and then it's over.
It's just white noise.
Wow, that's a great
it's like something I put on. Yeah. Something I put on in the background when I'm working.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I like your book reviews, Tucker. I think I read... Well, you read a lot of like grim stuff and like a lot of crime or like spy stuff.
I do. And then I take breaks and I read more serious stuff, but I'm not kind of lazy when it comes to like writing about more serious stuff. But I had this thing happen a few years ago where I was... I thought I was pretty... To be honest, I had a pretty high opinion of the way I was reading. And then this guy, that guy Jeet Heer, you know that guy? The guy who used to be a comics critic and now he writes for the New Republic. He's like a Canadian journalist. Yeah, he either emailed me or he left a comment. He was always really supportive of my book reviews. Mm-hmm. And in a way that let me know, I was like, you must really hate everything else I do. because you are really like specifically supportive of this thing that I very randomly do, and you have never said anything about the other stuff that I do all of the time with your friends.
He's like, hint, hint.
But yeah,
it's always such a good way to tell.
Yeah, it's like 90. The thing I do 90% of the time, you don't mention that, but the thing I do every once, like 6 months, you're like, excellent work. Very impressed. Within an hour of me doing it.
Oh my god! He's just like waiting.
But he was, he's just waiting and waiting. Stop talking about comics, moron. But he said this thing. He was like, boy, he said something like, you're reading a lot of. He said, this is just nonstop boy stuff or something like that. And my initial reaction, like any type of criticism on the internet, initially I was like, well, fuck, you don't know anything about. And then I was like, wait, let me actually look at what I've been writing about. And I like went back and I just like had that sinking feeling where I just kind of kept scrolling back to the book reviews. And I was like, oh yeah, these are all by dudes.
Oh man,
it was just dude after dude after dude, and I was like, they're not all white dudes. But then in my head, I was like, that's not an excuse. Like you can't just like do that. You can't just like start checking race to be like, oh, I'm not a bad dude. I'm a good person. Yeah. And so from that point on, I was like, I actually like went and pulled. At first I was like, I'm not going to buy anything. I just want to go see. So like, because I have all the books that I own that I haven't read separated from the ones I have read. Just because I've done this for so long, I've just bought books as a coping mechanism for depression since I was 7, you know, so I have a lot of books. And I separated them out until I was like, these are all by women. And then I just slowly have been plowing through those books. Like I've been doing that since he said that to me like 2 or 3 years ago. And obviously I take breaks and people give me books all the time. So I read books by men. And anytime there's a new Jack Reacher book, but it was like one of those things. Like I was like, at first, I obviously was doing it, and there was like an affectation to it. Like I'm doing this to compensate for a feeling of failure on my part, and like a feeling of embarrassment on my part. But as it went along, I was just like, oh no, I'm just doing this, and like I don't know why I had to force myself to do that. Well, actually, that's not ridiculous. Of course, I know why I had to force myself to do that, because it's easy to not try. Yeah. But now that I've done it. I don't have anything else beyond that to say. It was like I just did the thing that I probably should have done in the first place, and it's turned out wonderfully. Like I've read all these books by these women, and it's been incredibly enriching experience. And some of them have been terrible, just as some books by men are terrible. But quite a few of them have turned out pretty good.
That's cool.
Anyway, it's not that cool. It's just a fucking crutch. It's a crutch. It's just a way to not feel like a bad guy. It's not cool.
Well, you have to make an effort. Like, it's not, like, easy. You have to dig for stuff. Like, you're not just going to, like, walk into a bookstore and, like, oh, these are...
There's a bookstore. Do you guys ever look at shelf awareness? Have you ever looked at that? I had to get into that for work. It's like a Monday through Friday publishing email. So it's like news about the world of publishing. Okay. And it always has reviews. I think like once or twice a week it has reviews. And it's all publishing, but it always has stuff about bookstores, and it always has like the major news or whatever. And it's really punchy and quick. I wish there was something like that for comics, and there is something like it for movies, but it's just a really neat. It's got a great tone. And they had this special thing. I think it was last year, maybe 2 years ago. Some bookstore turned every book in the bookstore that was written by a man around, so you couldn't see the spine.
Oh, I do remember seeing that.
Yeah, that image was just so striking because you really look at it. It was like, this is an indie bookstore. You're not going to go to a more woman-friendly place than 94% of indie bookstores. Yeah, and even this indie bookstore that is like making an effort and making a point and knows what the hell they're doing, they still are like, yep, look at this. This is what we have to work with.
That's crazy. That's cool though that they did that. Yeah, I like your book reviews. I read, I think, Claps of Horses. Did you do a review on that one?
Oh yeah, the Evanson. Yeah. I'm a big fan of Brian Evanson. Yeah, I
read that on your recommendation. That was super good. And then I read all of his other stuff.
I've been slowly pacing. You know, he's got a new one coming out. I was just hearing about it today from Uncivilized Books. It's going to be like a hybrid. It's going to have like illustrations. It's not truly a graphic novel or anything, but it is. I mean, Uncivilized, is a graphic novel publisher, but it's going to be. It looks great. It's really great. Awesome. Henry King, I think is what it's called.
Oh, that's super cool. I'll have to look that up. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I don't know, like, where to start with this. Like, there's just a lot of things about the internet. I feel like that has changed, like, the whole scene in general, not just like comics, but art and movies and the way we consume stuff, and also how like talent grows and like doesn't really have a chance to like be cultivated by itself without being like influenced immediately by some sort of audience and literally every type of art ever made. But yeah, like I feel like right now there's no like small local scenes in comics, and it's just the internet. Like that's all we have, you know?
Yeah, I feel like that's kind of what's good and bad about it. Is like you want people to look at your work immediately, like right when you make it, when it's like kind of good, but I feel like for the most part, maybe not.
Yeah, like I always think about
maybe it's not like as important.
Yeah, like I always think about like people talking about like Fort Thunder or like these little comics groups that had their own kind of like language and like kind of like history together, and I don't think there's that right now. Like there's definitely like online like cliques and like friendships, like friend groups, but that's not like the same thing. I don't know. I just, because Tucker, you are like more versed in like the indie scene and like alt comics, quote unquote, but that sort of like fragmentation of like artists, of like comic scenes is kind of interesting to me. How do you think that's like affected?
Well, you know, I remember when the Fantagraphics released those Kokino books, the ones that like Angie's was a part of it, and all those different books that were coming out of Europe. And I went to this like talk that they gave, like it was like the editors and like 6 of the artists and stuff like that. And I just remember the woman, it always stuck with me, this one woman talking about, she was a German cartoonist, and she was like, look, we don't have, she's like, our scene is like, so like 10 years old. It was like, no, there's nobody's making comics and like talking to each other, and like it's all, everybody does it on their own, and there's only like 5 people. And she's like, and now there's like some of us, and now there's like a group, and we actually talk to each other. And she's like, but we're starting to have, you know, like some back and forth, like we see each other's work, and there's like, we have enough stuff that stores in Germany are willing to like put those things together. You know, they're willing to like not just stick a book amongst all the other books, like prose books on the shelf. Like they're actually willing to separate it out because there's enough of us. But there wasn't, like, she was talking about, and this is one person's experience, and this is years ago, but it just always stuck with me that I was like, oh, that's kind of like what we're losing now is, you know, you don't really have, and there's a bunch of people who are going to argue against this, but from my perspective, you don't really have a Texas scene for very long before that gets incorporated into kind of like a national scene or into like a specific genre based scene. Like it's not, I don't see that happening very often in like the US anymore. Like basically somebody comes along and they're more likely to ignore the people that live near them and work near them and seek out people who make comics like them.
Exactly.
And they can do that online. Yeah. You know, they're gonna be like, well, I make stuff that's about, you know, kind of anthropomorphic animals doing kind of affectionate type things with each other. That's more simple, and it's like genre based, but it's not like a thriller. And so they're gonna be like, I'm not interested in this guy who like I see at the local comic store or at the local library readings or whatever, like who is also making comics, but his comics are about, you know, dragons with swords, or they're about violent crime stories or stuff like that. I think, and that makes sense. Like, I think it ultimately, and I should say that I have to acknowledge my own kind of interest. And the certain thing is that I like the idea of like what's more difficult. And I think it is more difficult to kind of try and have a relationship with the people that are actually near you who might have much different interests than you have. And to try and bridge that gap of saying like, oh, well, why does this person like these kind of comics? You know, why is it that, and why do I dislike these kind of comics so much? Like, because a lot of times when you get down to it, you're like, what's your deal that like you care so much that this dude or this girl or whatever likes these Fox comics where they all dress like princesses, and you know, like why am I so angry at that? Why do I dislike this cute thing, or why do I dislike this non-representational thing? It's easier to just retreat into kind of a safe fan zone and enthusiast zone that the internet offers of just seeking out people who are like, I also watch, reruns of cartoons from 1994, and I really like this band, and I make comics that are about what happened when a fox dates a hobgoblin. And then you just find like 7 or 8 people like that, and you can just sit around and be with those people constantly online digitally. And then when you need a break, you just go to sleep and play video games or whatever the hell else you do. Whatever you do to turn off.
Yeah.
And I think that makes it hard to have a scene. You can't really have a scene if you all just like, if everybody's jerking off to the same thing. I just don't know how imaginative you're going to get with that thing. You might get really good at drawing it, but it's just not really going to you're not going to be pushing yourself that hard. To do something different.
It's just it's almost like fetishistic, like art wise, and like a creative mindset. Like you're just kind of grouping yourself with a community with the least friction, and you're not really it kind of like inhibits your like any sort of self-examination, and it makes that feel good, and that kind of just like keeps you in this like stale mode, kind of is what it feels like.
Yeah, I guess I get why people like the echo chamber thing. Just because a lot of the time, if you're like, if you like make comics in the first place, you're probably kind of a weirdo. So like you always felt weird, and like you're doing weird things that not everyone's doing. But at the same time, it's like, I don't know. I feel like for me, when I first started making comics, I felt like I had a scene, and then everyone like started working in animation. Like literally every single person I knew was like working at a studio instead of making comics. So it's kind of interesting, like kind of miss that aspect of it, like talking to people whose work I wouldn't necessarily gravitate towards on my own, but I'm exposed to just because like they're in my proximity.
And I think we have like similar tastes and stuff, but I think stylistically we're super different.
Yeah, I don't think people are going to be like, oh, I like mistook you for Sloane, or vice versa.
I don't think like our readers like there's overlap between us.
At least not like a lot, like not like a 90%.
There's like a very small overlap. But it was interesting, like being at SPX and just kind of, it was like 99% like indie comics and like cartoonist babies, and it was interesting to get like a lay of the land right now as to like trends and like stylistic groups and stuff. It was cool, but it also like really made me think, like we were talking about this earlier, Leslie, but just people who are like want to go through the motions of being a cartoonist just because it's like such a defined easy role to like sink into. And this goes for like different communities too, that people will just kind of like,
of course.
But there's some people there that are definitely just going through the motions and more concerned about their popularity and like being like the queen of their fandom. And
there's always going to be people like that, and it's not like a new thing at all, but it's interesting to have people like be more open about it and ask about it more openly and be okay with that. But I don't know. I feel like, especially at TCAF this past year, I felt like because we were so isolated, it was so weird not really being able to be like in the thick of it with like a bunch of different other cartoonists that weren't just like image artists. And
Tucker, you were at TCAF, right? Yeah, they had us in the like
the Masonic Temple.
Oh yeah, you're in that separate building.
Yeah, that was an experience. Not a fan.
I really, it bothers me when they do stuff like that. Like the big thing, the reason I think TCAF is so successful and CAB used to be so successful too. CAB has just struggled, I know, in recent years with all the changes they've had to go through. But when you have a chance to interest people who are just vaguely curious, like they're not comics people, it's just such a much more interesting vibe. Like that's the thing about SPX that'll always like hold it back a bit for me, and that's the thing that will always hold Comic-Con type, well, not Comic-Con, that doesn't really count, but like a lot of shows. So it's like if you have like these hurdles in place that stop a family from coming, that stop someone who's just like, oh, I might be interested in that possibly. Like for example, like having a show in a building where it's on like the 4th floor or something like that, and you're just saying it's just these hurdles that like, no, it's not going to work. You know, those people are going to immediately. So you self-select into these groups of people who, you know, it's like comic stores that are kind of weird and shitty too. It's the same problem. It's like if you're self-selecting the people who are like, oh, my curiosity is strong enough that it will outweigh my general revulsion towards Lady Death posters or my general annoyance at like having to like walk up a flight of stairs to go see something that costs $7.50 or something like that. TCAF and Cab's charm was always that it's like, hey, you're walking by, you know, and there's a sign, and you walk inside, and you're inside, and you're surrounded by this art form. Yeah. You're just right there. You just fall into it. And so all these people can like fall in, and that just changes the dynamic entirely. It forces people, well, it does. I mean, I would hope it does, but it can force artists to not just kind of be like, well, I'm going to also self-select and just focus on like established kind of fans who like look and behave a certain way. All of a sudden they're presented with all these normal civilian type people. And it just kind of resets. I think it just resets it. It like makes you can't use your normal habits that come up in being a cartoonist that we use to like kind of defend ourselves and deal with the fact that like there's so many people who are socially awkward and weird, and there's so many like bad blood kind of like little weird things. Like all of a sudden, like some mom is standing there with like a little girl, and you have to be like, oh, well, okay, well, she might like this one. I mean, this one has like boobs in it, so not that one, but yeah. And then also, it just changes that dynamic of how you talk about what this thing is. I just think that's has so much power. I think that's so useful. Because at the end of the day, we're not talking about like, it's not the genre that matters. It's that weird interplay of like words and pictures coming together and making a different form of language and a different form of art. Like that's the thing that's exciting to the people who are in the room doing this stuff. And like, I think too often when we're just surrounded by other comics people, it becomes these like splinter factions of how our comics are about different things or made for different reasons from the other stuff. And it's like, who fucking cares about that? That's the most uninteresting part. That's the boring part. That's the flavor. You know, like it's about this like weird interplay of how we make things happen. And I mean, I remember like, you know, one of the things you were just talking about, Leslie, when you talked about before people went into animation, some of these cartoonists I knew in Brooklyn, like that was what happened with them until they ran out of money and they had to get out of the studios. But like these guys and girls, they rented these studios and they had people in there who were making like weird 8-page, poorly drawn zine type comics alongside people who were like doing inking and coloring first, second books alongside some guy who was a freelancer for Marvel and was working on like Spider-Man backups. And it was it really was. It was what you want. It was a diverse room full of people. And the only thing they had in common was that they were drawing and writing words on the same, they were making comics of some kind. And so those people, like they were going to find a way to get along and stay sane because they're all working in their like 8 to 10 hour days. And I mean, it wasn't like perfect, but I think it was a much more interesting room. And I know that I'm not just saying that. They told me, they said that because they would come and hang out at the stores. Like it was a much more interesting room than if it had been a bunch of people who were like, yep, we're all making 8-page zines about cooking, you know?
Yeah. And it like changes like your art or like in some way, even if it's just like your perspective. So I don't know. It kind of sucks that people don't welcome that as much or like they're averse to it just because of, I don't know. They want to be safe and like with other people that think exactly the same way as they do and like the same things that they do. But yeah, it's like I was thinking about what we were saying earlier about like basically civilians, I guess, walking into TCAF and looking at comics when they normally might not. And it's so interesting when quote unquote normal people read comics, and it's so different from like people that have religiously read monthlies since they were kids and have pull lists and stuff like that. I don't know. It's like, I feel like people don't want to think about the way that someone who isn't already in comics or into them would see these sorts of things. But I don't know. I feel like we should think about it more.
Yeah. That and just like comics literacy in general, I feel like most cartoonists take that for granted, that's easy to have.
Oh yeah, your like cousin doesn't know how to read comics.
Yeah, my uncle, he's like He's like this famous like Latino like Broadway star, and he came to Cala like 2 years ago, and he had never seen my comics, and he like walks in and he's just like looking around, and he like picked it.
He's like people like this,
like you make this, and I was like, yeah, we all make comics, and he's like, huh, and he was just like so confused, and like he's like, I can just like read this, and he like flipped through it. I'm like, yeah, you can have that. You can go ahead and read that. And, he's like, okay, and just really perplexed the whole time, and just kind of like, yeah,
it's such a different world for him.
Yeah, people really underestimate how easy it is to like read comics, but also just like get into them in general and actually find the good ones. But yeah,
years and years and years and years ago, I did this thing. I think I called it stunt casting, where like once a week I would get someone who had never read a comic to read a comic. Like I would take whatever came out that Wednesday, and then it was like I worked at an advertising agency, so I did everybody who worked at the advertising agency that I was kind of friends with. I did my wife's family. I just plowed through. But I always found it interesting to talk to people, because it was a lot of people like they would just say things really simple. It'd be like, well, which order? Yeah. That kind of stuff. But one thing that came up, and it came up a few times, but it was actually my dad who verbalized it, I thought the best, was he read one of these. There's this period of time where Greg Rucka wrote Detective Comics, and he introduced Batwoman. And so they had that guy, J.H. Williams, draw it. And so it was a big deal that they were doing this Batwoman thing. But the big draw of the comic was J.H. Williams was drawing it. And my dad read it, and then he just he was kind of annoyed by it, because he was just like, nothing really happens, and this is and the stuff that does happen. I've seen that in movies before. I don't think he'd read it before, but it was, and it's like it was a one part of a Greg Rucka comic, and all Greg Rucka Batman comics kind of were very generic stories about like my teacher is like an old army guy, and I have to fight this person. Like that was it's very paint by numbers kind of stuff. And he actually point blank, I said, well, this one is actually kind of special. And he goes, I don't understand why this is special. And I said, well, actually, the main reason this one's special is because this artist is someone who is very well respected. And they're not normally drawn like this. They're not normally drawn with, this well and this kind of expansive and with this much color. And he kind of like sneered. And he said, what's the point of reading these things if they're not all going to be drawn well?
Oh.
And I was just like, and that was kind of a good point, from somebody who's like, his perspective was like, if this narrative is just going to be nothing, if the narrative is going to be something I've seen a bazillion times in TV shows and crime stories and all that kind of thing, then it better be drawn well, because otherwise I'm just wasting my time. And it was like, and I just remember kind of going like, that does kind of nail a lot of superhero comics right there. Like that is kind of like, these are just, I can get the same narrative out of Law and Order or about 1,000,000 1-hour TV dramas, that kind of thing. Like it's all the same, and it's going to be quick and a bit more efficient at the end of the day. If we're just talking about a kind of I want to take a break narrative, but that was the kind of stuff that like I didn't think about it that way, because you kind of get into it. It's almost like you're in this particular universe and you kind of agree to certain kinds of rules. And one of the rules you agree to in comics is that you're going to allow for narratives to kind of be pretty cliched and pretty repetitive. You are going to agree for for them to be splintered into tiny little factions. And you also are going to give extra credit to things that happen to look better than shittier things. And instead of just going like, wait, why am I agreeing to this? Why don't I just only read things that are like really inventive and unusual and special? And
that's crazy.
No. That's not how this is going to work. Yeah,
I know. There's so many rules to the way a lot of people that are really used to reading comics read, and then like when confronted with logic, it's just like it falls apart immediately. So it's just like, that's why I feel like it means so much more when someone's like, I could never get someone into comics and they like this one comic. Like one comic out of like the millions of comics that are made and published, they liked one that was like not as boring to them.
That's like Scott Pilgrim is like among like my little sister's like friends who like don't read comics. That's the only comic they've read and liked, but they're like, oh yeah, I love Scott Pilgrim. I'm like, oh, what other comics do you like reading? They're like, that's it. Like they haven't even bothered like trying to read more. They're just like, oh yeah,
they're like. they know that everything else is going to be like the Killing Joke or something, you know, like they don't want to read it.
And it's
so.
like, I feel like with cartoonists and like people who are like super invested in comics, like because you spend so much time with them, you're like investing like emotional currency in them. And, and it's hard to go back when you've spent so much time like having an opinion and studying this thing, and like you can't just be like, well, actually, maybe this is mostly bad most of the time, because then.
Yeah, who was the one that was it like the Miss Marvel writer that was talking about like gatekeepers or something? Like there was that one, like, was it the New Yorker or like some article about how kids didn't understand why Thor was a woman or like stuff like that, like some like Avengers thing. And then she was just like, well, if people that don't understand comics, they shouldn't read them. And I was like, how's anyone gonna read them then? Like no one reads comics.
Yeah, those numbers are so small. Like this. I mean, I think that's part of it too, is that I think you do this long enough, you start to go like, oh shit, this is really tiny. This is really, really little. This is like, I think the numbers like back in the 90s when they ran, which were like much bigger than they are now, the numbers are like, it's 1/3 of 1% of the population that is capable of reading the English language.
You're like,
oh, okay. It's already like only like what? I think 9% of the population of America is willing to read any book.
Yeah, that's
year.
like,
if you read 2 books a year, you're automatically in a tiny little group. And then you kind of stop and you go like, wait, how many people in here have read Saga, one of the most popular Image books? And you're like, okay, almost everyone just died. It's me and like 6 other people. And you're like, do you like those 6 other people? And you're like, nope, I hate them. I fucking hate them.
Dude, it's sad. Yeah. I'm already like banking on my Image series to like fail. It's gonna be really. I've just accepted.
It's like when in book sales, it's like there's a certain number where you should try to hit, and then in comics you could just throw it out the window because it's just like, what's the point if you're not making like Spider-Man? And what's the point of trying to meet that? But it's like, I don't know. It's just. Yeah, I guess like if you've been in it so long, it's scarier to examine that, like what you're doing and why you're doing it. And I don't know. If you're gonna examine, then you're not doing anything worthwhile.
Yeah.
But that's just my opinion.
Yeah, I feel like
I don't know. I'm trying more and more to like stop. I mean, part of it, as I know, is like capitalism and the language that surrounds capitalism is a totally toxic enterprise that will seep into every conversation. And I'm trying to not let financial things determine whether or not I believe something is successful or not. Like that is not how I perceive the world. And that's also, it's like, even if that's true, I don't want to live in a world like that. I don't want to live in a world where like I look at the artists that I'm friends with, or the artists that I work with, or the publishers that I work with, and then decide whether or not they're, make some kind of moral or value judgment on them based off financial concerns. Because that's just not, that is what giant companies, that is what governments, that is what people who want to make me feel weak and powerless so that I'll go buy more things and whatever, that's what they want me to do. And I can choose to not do that. And one of the ways I choose to not do that is like, I don't have to like worry obsessively about like whether or not these things are constantly increasing in profit, which is one of the that's one of the things that I think crushes comics people to some degree, is that they're kind of like, well, I'm not leveling up every year. And it's like, but if you're experiencing a life of and this is, I'm not trying to be pie in the sky. Like I have very serious financial concerns. I have a 4-year-old daughter. My wife is getting older. I'm getting older. I want to make sure that they're safe and they're taken care of. But I also want to live in a world where I acknowledge that like how I spend my life matters, and I don't want to spend my life constantly basing my own feeling of success or joy off this idea of money. And like I think that. I was thinking just a real simple thing. Like I was reading like one of Noah Van Sciver's Slow Graffiti, like this little weird mini comic he made. And he just talked to me, he was working. It was when he was working on this Johnny Appleseed book that got canceled from one publisher, and then it got published by Fantagraphics a few months ago. And in there he writes, he's like, I'm so fucking tired of doing this. I just want to work on my own stuff from now on. He's like, and then he writes this one thing. He's like, I just want to come back and I want to have 14 or 15 books to my name. And I'm like, that is a better way to look at a career than to be like, I want to make sure that I have a book that makes a New York Times bestseller list. I want to make sure that I have a book that sells 100,000 copies. Like, those things are all amazing, and if they happen, that's awesome. I mean, I think Emil Ferris, who made that Monsters book for Fantagraphics, like, I think that's great that book is sold as much as it has. But like, ultimately, what should matter is the book. What should matter is if she was able to make the things she wanted to make, and she didn't have to, like, you know, I mean, I sometimes just, like, the first year, and I'm getting like way personal, but like when Nina and I moved into this house, like we bought this house and we moved in, and immediately like so many things went wrong. Like the heat went out and we have to get the heat fixed. You know, all this stuff like went wrong. We just didn't know what we were doing. And I had to like reset my brain at a certain point because I was getting up in the morning and I was like just bringing all this like fear and, you know, anger and frustration and short-temperedness into my like life with my wife and daughter. And I only have a little bit of time in the mornings with them before I go to work. And so I was just like, I have to just reset back to like, I have a roof over my head. Some people don't have that. I'm going to be okay. Nothing's happened, right? We're not getting evicted today. Everything is fine. And I had, and it was like, I had to fake it. And then it finally like got okay. And I try to remember that because I think people in comics sometimes are like thinking about like, well, what am I going to do if this doesn't work out or this didn't work as well as it should have? I don't know. I'm kind of, I don't know where I'm going with this, but I do, mainly it's just like, I cannot make value judgments based off money anymore. That's what fucked up crazy people want me to do. That's what banks want me to do. I'm not going to do that anymore. You know? Because honestly, if you're also going to do that, you would go you would not make comics. Like if money is your total concern, then like, holy shit, don't make comics. Don't make comics.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's just like, we've talked about it before, and it's just like, obviously don't go into comics if you want to make like, if you want to be a millionaire, but also just like, it matters more to make something that you really care about or like really believe in and wanted to make in the first place than selling like even 100,000 copies. But I don't know. I mean,
I think mainly just like don't, whether you do comics or not, don't run around just being like, oh, I just want to be a millionaire, because what kind of toxic freak just is like, if that's the only thing you care about, you have other issues.
I know, it really freaks me out when people are like, I only care about money and making money. I'm just like, what does that even mean though? Like, how can that be possible? Like, how is that interesting enough to be the only thing that sustains you?
It's like a psychological thing. Like people that are like the most financially unstable, they're basically in the state of mind as like being a hostage. It's like what like studies have said. So they're constantly like, it's like an abusive relationship. You're just constantly like, oh, like maybe I'll get money, or, you know, or you just get really beat up and you're out of a house or you're way into debt. And like, I don't know. I feel that though.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, I'm really kind of, I don't want to try to take my own personal experience and extrapolate it into like a formula for behavior for others. But it really is one of those things. Like I do feel like in comics, as time has gone on, and especially as I've dealt with like publishers and artists, it is the ones who are like not so tied into that idea. Like they're able to separate their idea of value and success from financial concerns that seem to be the ones who are kind of no matter what the work is turning out like, who seem to be able to enjoy their life. And like, if you're not going to enjoy this while you're doing it, it is such a laborious task. It demands so much of, there's so few artists I know who are able to really like take it easy with this stuff. Like it demands so much of them. And it's so much from every aspect of their life. There has to be a way to enjoy that process, or at least not to feel like you're enslaved to that process, or else you only get one shot at this. You know, it just goes by so quickly.
Yeah, I got to talk to Fife a little bit, and like this really makes me think of him, because he's like not just drawing like his own thing that he loves, but he's like he was publishing it full time, or like he's still doing his monthlies by himself, like publishing it and preparing it for print, and like that's like tedious. That's like hella tedious. So you know he loves it. Like,
filling envelopes.
It's like all this grunt work, and that's legit. That's legit passion. But I feel like that kind of ties in with like a lot of young cartoonists now are like trying to get into these corporations and like trying to like change them from like within, you know, like at least like with the big two, like Miss Marvel, or like whenever they like change the ethnicity of like a character, It's like such a or the gender, it's like such a magnet for like young cartoonists, and it's like, I don't know. I feel like that probably wasn't the case like a long time ago. Tucker, what do you think? How has that? I feel like that's a more recent trend of like this like play to diversity.
It's hard for me to know because I'm not as tied into it. But I mean, yes, obviously that's a totally true thing. That's a new thing that they're doing, as opposed to what they used to do. Like what they used to do was like variant covers and restarting things and bringing, taking Jim Lee off Punisher and putting him on X-Men. Like that's what they used to do. And that's what worked at those companies for them to have that like surge of profits that they needed to keep going. Like that was because their numbers of like circulation have just dwindled, pretty consistently and over the course of time. Over the course of time, it's a number that keeps going down. It has bumps where it goes back up and it makes more money or whatever, but ultimately they lose people. So they try to find ways to bring in new people. And that way that they've been using in the last few years has been to, bring on a different looking group of people to write and draw them. Although they haven't done as much of that, it still is a lot of white guys writing and drawing this stuff. But they have changed those characters and they have changed the representation factor in those books. And I mean, I believe that their motives are almost across the board are purely for financial gain. Like it's, there's no way. A new idea. Like there's definitely somebody who works there who's going, like, this is going to do it. Finally, Muslim girls are going to see a superhero they care about. Yes, that person does exist there, and I believe they genuinely feel those things, and they genuinely are putting that in, and I think that's why something like Miss Marvel works, is because there is a genuine desire there to make this thing that has value. But for the most part, those decisions are like, well, why don't we just make Thor a girl? We'll make Thor a girl. And we'll make a Spider-Man that's like a girl. We'll make a girl Spider-Man. And then we'll make a black Spider-Man. We'll make a black Spider-Man. Like, yeah, we're going to do that. We're going to make a Latino Ghost Rider. And instead of riding a motorcycle, drive a car. Like, they're going to do stuff like that. It's like, I think that's probably, if you're going to put it on a scale of morality, I guess that's more of a better choice than like in 2002 when they were like, let's make what's that character's name? Let's make Deadlock like a shitty comic, like let's make Batman like a guy named Steve. Like let's do that. Like that. Yes, I guess it's better that they made Thor a girl than when they made Batman a guy named Steve. I don't know. I mean, it doesn't really. I don't know that the things that have made the world a better place in the last 20 years are that like less babies die, in like Eastern Europe, like the mortality rate of infants has gone. Is doing better in sub-Saharan Africa. Like those things are better. Those things have made the world a better place. I don't know that making Thor a girl has a lot of impact. I mean, maybe it does. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there are a lot of young women out there, and like 25 years from now, they're going to say, "What inspired you to, make the world a better place?" And they're going to say, Jason Aaron made Thor a girl for like 7 months before he went back to being a guy. And that's how I knew I wanted to be a fucking brain surgeon. I don't know. Maybe that's going to happen. If that happens, I'm not saying I don't want that to happen, but I am going to say I don't care. I don't give a shit what you do with Thor. I don't care. I don't think it really matters. I don't think that the stories that they tell in those comics really make much of a difference. I think that I don't know.
I should be more specific. I'm like, not necessarily concerned about like the whole like what good it's doing, but actually that it's like that it's happening, and then like almost like kind of like beguiling cartoonists to like, oh, they're diverse, they're like representing me, so like, and then you have like all these fan artists that like they're like, oh yeah, well I'll go work for them because they're obviously like better now, like they're not the evil corporation they once were. Like, I feel like every time there's, like, a call for, like, comic art, like, I think there's, like, a Boom guy, like, does one every once in a while. It's, like, so sad. They're like, we have a new a new IP we're working on, like, linking your portfolio. And it's just got, like, hundreds and hundreds of replies of, like, all these, like, amazing portfolios. And, like, I'm like, you guys need to, like, just do your own comics. They're not going to pay you anything anyway. And, like...
Yeah, I feel like on one hand, I'm like all for representation, and I think it's better than nothing. Sure. Do you know what I mean? Like, obviously, it's a good thing. Like in the in the bigger picture, like, I think it's important, and people do see that it does influence like younger people as well. But at the same time, it's like I'll see like it's obviously insidious as well. And then seeing like checklists of people being like, oh well, this character is like non-binary and like black and 15, or like where this character is, I don't know. It's like it's interesting to see that kind of narrative and like fandom cannibalizing itself to like bending over backwards, trying to justify that that's okay and that's like a good thing. To have all these different criteria to meet and like have characters be like certain gender identity or like sexuality in order for someone to
their whole
care at all.
Judgment of the entire piece of work on their checklist.
Yeah, and like impeding everything else just to be like, oh well, like this character in Lumberjanes like is a lesbian, and that's why we should care at all. As opposed to like, oh, I don't really like this comic. It's just like for kids, or it's like bad, which is what I think is more important in narrative. Just because comics aren't changing the world, not in like the big way that people act like they are.
Well, I think we always. I mean, this is kind of a weird jump to make, but I mean that's how I operate. But like I feel like we always want to have rationalizations for kind of continuing to do things the way we want to do things. Whether those rationalizations are really based on anything more than self-interest, I don't know. But like, I mean, at one point or another, one thing that was coming up was we were talking about how like our smartphones, like especially iPhones or stuff, are made in these places where they have like suicide nets because it's such a horrible place to work that people kept killing themselves. And like that was a conversation for about 7 minutes because everybody was like, well, are we going to stop buying iPhones? Or are we going to make them in a place where we give people a living wage and they don't want to kill themselves? And everybody kind of en masse, without really like saying it, just kind of said, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to say it's okay. We're going to come up with excuse. We're going to forget about it. We're going to try not to. Our news media is just kind of going to ignore it, and it'll come up every once in a while when you go to like the Baffler, one of those kind of places. The Intercept might bring it up every once in a while, but ultimately we're all going to keep using our fucking iPhones, and we're just going to ignore the fact that they're made in these horrible ways. We're not going to have like a blood diamonds movement to fix that, and with that's one of the things that Marvel and DC are very good at. And ultimately, it's not even Marvel and DC; it's capitalism. It's like really good at it. It's like we'll find a way so you can just keep doing that thing. And people are like, maybe I shouldn't buy these comics. Maybe I should stop. Maybe they don't care about me. Maybe they don't have any characters with women. They don't care about they don't have any lesbian characters, any trans characters. They don't have any black characters. Maybe I should stop supporting this enterprise that so clearly doesn't care about me. And then Enterprise goes, oh well, we'll make a Star Wars movie that's got a black guy in it. Well, no big deal. Because you know what? Even the racist Star Wars fans are still going to come see it because they fucking love Star Wars. And now we'll have all the black kids can come love Star Wars too. Like, you guys don't have to go anywhere. Everything's going to be fine. We'll keep making the thing. You keep coming to the thing. And you're like, well, should we worry about like actual issues? Like, there's a protest going on outside. And there's like the cops like are driving around in like SWAT, these army vehicles. Should we do something about that? And you're like, no, it's fine. We made Thor a black girl, so you can just stay at home. You keep reading Thor. It's gonna be fine. And I mean, I don't think that I don't believe that there's like a lizard cabal of capitalists who are doing that. I think that's just the way capitalism works. That it kind of sees and goes like, oh, we're gonna lose people because they're not seeing themselves in these books, so we'll put them in these books. And then they'll continue to buy these things because that's our job. Our job is to make things that a bunch of people will continue to buy. And then we'll just keep doing that. And that's how we're going to do things. And ultimately, people are going to be like, you know what? I really do want to keep buying that thing. And you've made it okay. You've given me the sticker or the permission that I needed. I'm being really dismissive of that. And I don't want to be too dismissive. But it's because I do believe that representation does matter. But I don't believe that it matters to the people who are doing it.
Yeah, of course it doesn't. It's just like with most things. But what was that like? Was it Marvel or DC? I mean, they've both done it, but people are always trying to like boycott them or say that they would boycott them because like they have an editor that would like harass women or something. And then that would get out, and then people are like, "Oh my god, I'm going to boycott DC and like take all like DC's titles off my pull list." And then like a week later, they're like, "Oh, new comic book day is here," and I got all my comics. It just like, it doesn't mean that much. And I feel like people like will just tweet whatever and then kind of make their own stand like for the day and go off for a day and then forget about it, like right after that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I can't remember the last boycott that actually lasted for an extended period of time.
Yeah, if it lasts more than like 4 hours, maybe it's successful.
Yeah, there was this like good article that I can't remember if you read it, Leslie. It was about premium mediocrity. And that
I did read that one.
It's super good, and it's like premium mediocrity is like the finest bottle of wine at like Olive Garden or like cruise ships or like the Bellagio. And I feel like we're at this premium mediocrity level of morality right now where we're just like, oh yeah, like I like black female Thor, like of course I do. Or like
you're like, I care about like the like X social issue, but also I really love shopping at Forever 21 or something. Like,
well, it's like that. Just did you guys read any of that Jessica Crispin book, Why I'm Not a Feminist?
Oh no, but I did read a couple of interviews with her, but not yet.
No.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things she talks about in there is that's a big part of it. Like capitalism is a big part of the problem, because ultimately, like a lot of people are like, how can I just buy something? How can I just use shopping and consumerism to stand in for my political beliefs? And like you can't really. Like you have to do like, and I can't remember if it was like one of those Chapo people or something like that, but like, it said part of the reason the Tea Party is so successful is because the Tea Party doesn't care about premium TV. The Tea Party is willing to do boring shit, like sit around and like make a bunch of phone calls and like obsess over, gerrymandering districts and stuff like that. Whereas like, like a liberal mentality is like, how can I like do this on my app while I'm binge watching Stranger Things? Like, I'm not going to like, you're just like, hey, well, maybe you should like, I don't know, not watch Game of Thrones. Maybe you should just not watch Game of Thrones and dedicate the amount of time you were going to do that to doing this other thing. And they're like, what are you, fucking crazy? I'm not going to skip Game of Thrones. Meanwhile, like Tea Party guys are like, no problem. I'll sit in a Walmart, all parking lot all fucking day. Like, I just don't care. Most of those guys are going to die when they're like 47 from diabetes and all kinds of other problems. But still, that's what they do. They kind of just go like, well, time to fucking just make a phone call to my senator for 17 hours.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
It's just something, it's like we've all agreed upon this weird, like mutually enforced, like mediocre morality and like sometimes mediocre art. Like we've just like, oh yeah, no, this is fine.
Yeah, it's like we're like so plugged in all the time, but if you're like just conveniently pretend like you didn't see someone or something that really bothered you and you didn't talk about it, then maybe it doesn't exist. Like even if you saw it on Twitter like 1 second ago, you're just going to be tweeting about like Game of Thrones, like your like Game of Thrones party that you're having. But
I would say also I think social media is a big part of it too, because there's nothing more like nothing exhausts one's energy towards actually affecting social change and participating in social change than to just stay plugged in for hours on end, performing that social change for people on Twitter, Facebook, and that sort of thing. It's just like, it's like, are you gonna go out and like do boring shit? Are you going to go and like work at like a polling place or something like that? Or try to like get more, make sure that like the African-American community that's near yours that is getting like written off the ballot boxes and stuff like that. Are you going to go over there and like help get those drives out so those people don't lose their right to vote when the next, election for a tiny seat comes up? It's like really boring kind of shit. It's like kind of endlessly having the same dumb conversations over and over again with a bunch of people you barely know. Or do you want to just sit around for like 3 hours with your closest friends online and like be hilarious? That's you want to
like make Twitter threads.
I'm not going to pretend that stuff's not funny. Like you sit around and follow the right people about social change and like Twitter justice and all that kind of stuff. Like those people are fucking funny. They're really smart. They're much more interesting than you're going to have a much funnier, more interesting day than you will doing like 8 hours out there, like sitting behind a card table going like, yes, okay, now this is the form you have to fill out so that you can be registered on this date, and now you have to have this thing to prove this is the wrong place to come to. You need to go to that table over there because your zip code ends with a 7. This is the zip code. I'm sorry that you waited for 3 hours, that kind of thing. Like that's the stuff you have to do. Like I'm not going to say that like you can't affect change on social media, but you can't affect that much. And I think that like if you spend too much time on that, by the end of the day, you could become just someone who's like exhausted. But you think you've done something. You're like, yes, 748 people follow me. I don't know if you're aware of that. And at least 200 of them don't have me muted yet. So.
Yeah, it's like, it's so tiring to be on Twitter. Like, just looking at it, I'm just like, ugh, I'll just get off right now. But some people love it, and some people just think that making enamel pins of like girl power is gonna really matter that much. But
tell me more about these enamel pins. Where can I get these enamel pins?
You're like, which Kickstarter can I like crowdfund so you get some enamel pins?
It's true. It's real, and it's happening right now.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's like funny because we're sad.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I don't know if you're aware, but I don't know if you noticed when I mentioned earlier, but I actually have a daughter, so I could really use a girl power pin so that she's aware at all times.
That you know that girls can have power.
Yeah, like, so she can wear that around. So when I'm not around her, she can look down at the pin and be like, "Oh
my god,
girl power."
It's like pinned to her flesh. Like,
oh my god.
My dad paid $7 for this, $4.95 shipping, so $11.95 actually.
It's just like, it's interesting that like people will look at someone on their Twitter soapbox and just be like, well, they're really admirable and they're really doing something. There's obviously people that can tell that they're not really doing as much as they say they are, but for the most part, it's like kind of baffling and interesting.
Yeah.
To see that.
I'm having flashbacks to SBX. Bad flashback.
Oh no.
Oh, how was SBX? Tell me about SBX.
It was good. It was my first one, so I didn't know what to expect, but it was cool.
Is it true that the theme of the prom was sleepover?
Oh, it was.
Ew.
Yeah.
Pretty gnarly. I didn't go, but there were some people wandering around
in PJs?
And onesies, and like some people in like full like silky like 2-piece like pajamas.
That's why would you go to like SPX prom in silky pajamas?
I don't know. I was at a loss, but yeah, that happened.
Nice.
But yeah, and then
the aftermath.
And I don't know. I was like upstairs doing stick and pokes. I didn't even bother. But it was cool. It was cool to meet people that I like, East Coast cartoonists that I had never met before.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah.
Did you come away with anything special comics wise?
There was like a handful of cartoonists that were like pretty young that were doing some really cool work. There's this one dude, his name's like Bjorn. I think his like handle is like Swamp Sun.
Mm-hmm.
But he had some really sick like airbrushed like resto printed mini comics that were just like super zany and like kind of manga-esque, but then also like very like American, like alt, like abstract cartoons. He was pretty cool. But yeah, I was mostly just like, it was just like really cute, and like during one of the speeches during the like awards ceremony, they're like, you know, we're all like friends here, and like I feel like I probably would have felt more for it if I had gone when I was younger, but now I'm just like I'm like, that's nice, but also
you're like, I'm not friends with everyone here. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I think I'm too
that man is a liar.
Yeah. We're not friends. We are not friends.
I feel like I'm too old for that now. Maybe when I was like 22, I'd be like, yeah.
I would have like cried. And like, there's like a cartoonist dude that like died recently that,
oh no.
They have like a
memoriam for them.
Yeah. And the dude was like tearing up, and that was sad, but yeah.
I think I don't know. I feel like words like community and friendship get thrown around at certain shows. In a way that's very cheap, and it's very much like
fake.
Yeah, it's not. This is, you know, I don't know. I think that, I don't know, friendship is something that's demanding. Like, I mean, you know,
yeah.
Like I think about relationships I have now that I've been like, gosh, I've known this guy for 14, 15 years, and that's ups and downs. That's some serious ups and downs right there. To like be friends with somebody that long. I mean, there's been moments where I thought this thing was over, where I was like, I don't want to fucking talk to him anymore. Like that's what friendship is like kind of going through that. But the attitude with like certain kinds of, especially in the comics community, although it's also true in the like the improv comedy community, where it's just like No, it's like I'll buy your thing, you'll buy my thing. We'll see each other once a year, and we'll be like, "Hey, did you guys? How stupid was Iron Man? Man, that was dumb." Anyway, everybody hugs. Like let's all do this.
Yeah.
And then they have the other like weird comics version where it's like guys who work for IDW who are like, "Let's all go down and get a pint together." Fucking, talk about how they fucked up Doctor Who or whatever that shit is. And they say cheers a lot. Like that's not friendship either. Like that's just
It's like, it's not, I really don't like when people use that word for just like this medium that we all work in, because it's like a community is something that's like way more material that like binds people together, and like it's tough.
It does something for them in a way.
Yeah, and you have to put a lot of effort into making it a community, and it's going to be like I feel like comics is more, they're like more ready to like just like completely like kick someone out from their entire group than actually go through like any sort of difficult like conversation with them or work through something. They're just like, oh no, I'm done. Like,
yeah.
And sometimes it's because they do bad. Sometimes it's because they like, that guy at Dark Horse who like bit people and stuff like that. Sometimes you like end a relationship because of that. But other times you just end a relationship because you're like, I don't like how this guy's always talking about how good X-Men Apocalypse was on Twitter.
Yeah, it's like
I'm done with that moron. Like really?
Yeah.
That's why you write people off?
Yeah.
Yeah, like people will do like horrible things to everyone else, and then like the second they express an opinion that isn't the same as someone else's, they're like, oh well, I'm done with them. And like they already did really bad things that are certifiably bad, and you should have already cut them off, and yet you want to keep on like giving them second chances until they like don't like X-Men or like Avengers or something. It's so, I don't know, it's so like, I feel like I'm so bitter towards like that song and dance.
Yeah.
And like, maybe people are just nicer to like younger cartoonists or something, but I'm just like, I feel old, and like I don't want to be like nice to people that I've had like bad experiences with, or like got into like actual disagreements with and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, like there's like a comics mixer here like once a month. And that biter dude showed up to one of them because Dark Horse is for me. I was like, why is he here? Like, who invited him? And then I haven't gone back since. So, yeah.
Oh, God.
I'm like, really? He needs a second chance when he's like literally bitten multiple people like a little vampire? Like,
I know.
And
like,
he hasn't lost his job.
Hasn't lost his job, no.
Mm-mm.
He's just a Dark Horse biting guy now, and he's still thriving.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. He's such a jokester. Yeah, I'm just like a little too bitter, but I'm also like really hyped on comics right now. But
because you just came out from SPX, so you're like high on it.
I wish I had something like more like more romantic to say about it, but I'm just like, nah.
It doesn't exist inside of you anymore.
I'm like, people were nice, but like we're not a community. I'm just gonna draw my comics and.
I feel like
I think it's really tough to have a community when, like, I mean, comics inherently is like, hey, you want to make comics? Like, yes, I do. So, like, I want to. Okay, go spend 10 hours by yourself.
Yeah, so like, it's so lonely. Unless you have people like assisting you constantly, you're not going to see a bunch of people.
Yeah,
and that's not good. I mean, that's not even that status relationship. There is so fucked up. When you have somebody who's just like, you're like, yep, I got 3 assistants.
Yeah,
they're all my friends.
They're like they're basically appendages that I have to remember not to sexually harass.
Oh God. Yeah, I feel like if someone came up to me and was like, "Isn't the comics community great?" I'd just be like, I would just immediately dismiss them, because I'm just like, ugh, whatever. Like, you're not one of the real ones because you're saying that already.
Yeah.
Like, everyone knows that it's not a real thing. Like, stop lying to yourself and don't lie to me either. I already know.
Yeah.
I'm not saying you can't have friends in it. I believe that's totally possible. I just think that thing where we all are supposed to like get together on a bus and ride around together, and I don't know, that thing just seems so odd to me. It's like I don't believe that. I've worked in other industries, and other industries don't do that. They don't. I mean, there is theater camp, but you stop going to that after you get out of high school.
It's very an infantilized industry, I think.
Yeah, and it's. I guess anything to do with that kind of, I don't know, what is that? Like, industries that have to do with kids, kind of, like, spawning from being childhood dreams to, like, being actual real jobs, kind of have that vibe to me. Like,
Yeah, animation like too kind of has that.
Yeah, like fake positivity and kind of like, you know, super hyper and like really, you're like really hyped on everything and really excited all the time and super into your job because it's like a dream.
Yeah.
It's unhealthy. Just saying it right now, it's unhealthy.
I don't know. I actually I think I disagree with you a little bit there, just because I kind of feel like, I mean, I'm obviously like in the honeymoon, you know, part of my job right now, but I do feel like the more and more that I find like that cheesy thing that I always thought I was so dismissive of when I was younger, of like having a good attitude, has really been like the biggest change in my life. And part of it is, you know, I'm like every other cliche, like now that I have a child, I'm just kind of presented with that all the time. It's like, gosh, what a neat way to live life she has, of just kind of like committing so fully to everything she does, even when it's upset or bad, like just going all in. And like I've tried to copy that to some degree in my own life, of like, all right, what's going to happen today if I just try? Like, I'm going to try today. Like, I'm going to experiment today. I'm not going to get mad today. I'm not going to lose my temper today. I'm going to try and keep that in, because that's one of my struggles, is like managing my temper. It's like, I'm not going to lose my temper today. And today, when something comes up, I'm just going to be like, oh man, I'm excited about this challenge, as corny as it is. And like, it has proven itself to be something. But then again, I also think that that's different than what I'm responding negatively to when I see it in these kind of comics behaviors. It's like, that's hard to do. Having a good attitude all day and not losing your temper and not shit talking is hard to do. It is not hard to just kind of Pollyanna your way through life. It is not difficult to do that. It is not difficult to have relationships that are totally based around internet personas and like brief. It is not hard to do that. It is hard to like actually have a conversation with another person and listen to what they're saying and not just wait to talk. That's hard to do. But it isn't very hard to just kind of sit around and be like, what's this? What's your new thing? Oh my God, that's so great. Oh my God, did you see that thing?
Yeah.
Oh my, that's not what I'm saying. Like, but having an attitude is like, you know what, today's going to be awesome. I'm going to find a way to make today awesome. And then like the dog pisses in your daughter's bed at 2:30 and you're like, okay, I didn't want that to happen. I did not.
Yeah.
I wanted to just sleep because tomorrow is my first day at my new job. That's what happened this past week. Like my first night. The dog has never done that before. I don't know why he did that. And it was
He knew
awful.
that you were going to have a big day tomorrow.
Yeah, and he ruined it. But then I was like, and I ran to the train, and I got to the train, and this has never happened before. I watched the train as the doors closed, and it drove away, leaving me to wait another 30 minutes for the next train.
No.
I was like,
oh my God.
How is this all going? And I really was like, I was like texting my wife, and she was just like, just start over. And I was like, I'm going to start over because I'm going to go meet these people for the first time, and I want to make this like work out. And I'm not gonna, I wasn't pretending. Like, I did feel pretty angry, but like, I don't know. Now I'm just kind of like totally derailed that and turned it into like a personal thing.
No, I feel that. Like, it's different, like trying to maintain like a positive outlook, but I think mostly like my issue is just with people who are in this like weird bubble and they don't want to like talk about anything difficult and they just want to like live in this weird dream world where there's like no problems or challenges or things that are like they need to work on, or, like
or like they've reached a point where they can like just dole out tons of advice to other people and they're super positive all the time about it. It's like, you can't teach me anything though. Like, I feel like having a positive attitude attempting to have a positive attitude is a bit different from projecting that positivity to other people all the time about things that aren't necessarily good. Like talking about working too much, but you're like, it's worth it, like, to do this and stuff like that. Like, it really bothers me a lot when people do that. And I feel like maybe people are like kind of wiser to it now, like, as opposed to maybe a year ago when people were just super into like talking about working too hard and like killing themselves and how it's worth it just to like do that. But I mean, I think a lot of people can get something out of it, but I feel like it's just not realistic, and it's not actually helping as many people as they might think it does.
And it's like, I don't know, it's like good to feel bad sometimes. It's like, I don't know.
It's kind of good
normal.
to like,
it's normal.
It's normal, and it gives you perspective and like, I feel like, I don't know, like positivity, like especially in comics. I don't know. Like, you should work hard and you should like not be like killing yourself and injuring yourself, but like work hard.
Yeah.
And, like, don't let self-care take over your entire life. Like, I don't know. This is kind of a deep cut because it's like young cartoonists that are like super into that. Like, don't, like if you need to sleep and like you can't draw for like a week, like that's fine. Like,
is it fine?
Like, just go make like some macaroni and cheese and then go back to bed
and watch Stranger Things
and it'll be okay. Like, but I'm like, you should like sweat and like maybe bleed a little bit over this craft that's like incredibly difficult to maintain. And
yeah. And I love to like commiserate with other people about things being not so easy all the time. And it feels good. I mean, like, it feels like you're not completely off the rails and like not doing everything wrong. Mm-hmm. If other people are like, yeah, I've also sucked at this and like this also sucks, and like you're not totally alone and you're not always happy even though you're doing what you want to do.
Yeah.
I think that's really well said. I totally agree with that. I think there's a line between self-care and self-worship.
Yeah, totally.
I think that's a hard thing to manage, but it's
like denying yourself hard work by like being too delicate with yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean you can't live that way. And I don't know. But I think sometimes too it's I always look at it like you can't not everybody's going to be able to like live the same way, so you can't come up with this like uniform idea of how people are going to get by and feel better and do things. But I think that kind of conversation always, when people like go online or something like that and like make these big proclamations of how you should do things, you're like, no man, that's just how you did things. That's just how you with your particular strengths and weaknesses and your shortcomings and your support network and all that stuff. That's what you found that works for you. Like there are uniform, like it is. I mean, I was just reading this book about it. Like it is across the board true that like your habits are stored in your basal ganglia, and like your choice-based thinking and that kind of stuff is stored in your brain. And so if you have things that are habitualized, they're going to use less energy. That's true across the board, but that's not like interesting to talk. I mean, that is interesting, but that's like, that's kind of a boring specific thing. Whereas more people are like, every day you have to just like stand up and like look at what you've done and be like, that's great. And then you have to go sit down and just like be with yourself for like 20 minutes while you have a cup of tea. That's like your fucking specific thing, man. That's
it's so crazy.
Like that's not, I don't know. That's just not how whatever. All I'm doing is basically regurgitating what you're saying so that I can be a cheerleader for it. I like what you said.
Yeah. I know. I hate when people are like, yeah, you got to do your morning pages. Wake up at like 5 a.m.
Who says that?
I don't know. I always hear people saying that. Do you not hear people saying that?
Like warm-ups?
Not even warm-ups.
Or
like doing your pages. They're like, yeah, you just got to get them out of the way before like the whole day starts. So they're like up at like 5 a.m. They're like, yeah, you just start inking.
What?
I was like, ew. Why would you do that?
Oh my god, that actually is making me feel so uncomfortable right now. Like, the fact that people actually, it's like an institution that people actually
advocate for.
Like it's something that people actually do. Yeah, I'm like, can you not? Like, can you just?
I'm a big believer in getting up at 5 a.m. But I'm so
no. You have to get up at 3 a.m. and then like have your coffee and like do some meditation and self care, and then you can do your pages at 5 a.m. Just basically like live your whole life before like 12, like before noon.
That's pretty much what I do. That's kind of my thing. That's totally my thing. That's 100% my thing.
Tucker, are you doing like what is your workout thing called again? You're like, what is it called that you do your workouts? You're like crazy workout.
They all have different. You mean CrossFit?
CrossFit, yeah. That's sorry, I forgot the name of it. Yeah, Tucker does CrossFit, so he's he's like on another level from us.
Oh god. I remember my friend was talking about how like she used to do CrossFit and then like I was like, can you ever stop like in the middle? And she was like, no, even if you shit your pants, you can't stop. And I was like, I was like, why? Like you have to keep going. Like, why do you have to not stop? Like, why can't that be where you stop?
I don't want to get in between your relationship, but I'm just going to firmly disagree with your friend and be like, you should totally, whatever you're doing, whether it's CrossFit or inking pages, if you shit your pants, you should stop.
If anything, you shouldn't be shitting anywhere other than like when you want to.
Yeah, that's
or like
that's
when you
your
have
special
to.
thing. Yeah.
But like if you literally can't stop what you're doing, like inking your morning pages and like doing your CrossFit at the same time, then I don't know. Like I don't really know how people function like that.
I don't think there's a better example of your body telling you to stop something than shitting when you don't want to shit. Like, I think that is 100% your body being your friend and being like, hey, pal, change, do something
different, please.
This ain't
Stop
working.
doing this. I'm dying right now.
How can I humiliate and make you more uncomfortable so that you quit? There's no other way other than dying, which usually involves shitting your pants.
Yeah, it's terrifying. I'll never die just because of that. I mean, I was just looking at Twitter and people were just talking about like diversity in comics, and I was like, what the hell is happening? Like all the time. Every day there's like a new thing that people are going on about. And I'm like, is this one real, or is this one like just people going off on something that they know that they should be really angry about?
Yeah, I like missed the whole like comics criticism debacle. I don't know what it was about.
Was there something that happened?
There was. There's like all these subtweets, and I was like, who said something? And I think it was like, I think Ave like blogged something about it. Like it was like Declan said something.
I don't know who that is though.
He's just like he's like Irish or something. He's like a cartoonist.
Yeah, he draws comics. Okay.
And he was like, people need to like study comics to ever be able to talk about them.
Oh man, I kind of get that. Like, I feel like a lot of people that read comics don't study them. Like, people that read them normally don't really understand what comics are for. Like, they're just like reading the text almost, and like just the pictures are like kind of just there. And
yes, yes, Larry.
Yeah, so I'm just like, you're not even like, people that read them normally don't even read them properly a lot of the time. So why are you trying to say that people need to study comics? Like, who's going to study comics other than like nerds?
Yeah, and like us.
If you're someone like, I mean, I've met that guy. He's a nice guy, and he's married to that
colorist
Jordie Bellaire, and she's an excellent colorist. She's very talented. I don't give a fuck what they think about comics criticism at all. I don't care. The people that they support who write comics criticism write terrible comics criticism.
Yeah.
And across the board, anytime somebody who works for those companies has anything to say about comics criticism, it's always completely idiotic. It's always built around like, they wish there were better blurbs being written by marketing whores. Who cares?
Yeah.
I don't care.
Yeah.
I don't care. It's not interesting. They never talk about actual interesting comics criticism. They don't read actual interesting comics criticism. None of that matters. You're going to tell me that like there should be better comics criticism so that the people who color Captain America or letter Batman miniseries should have better. I don't believe that they should have better articles written about them. I believe that intelligent people should not be forced to write stupid, moronic things about Marvel comics. I think that's a waste of intelligent people's time. I think that's who cares? Yeah. I don't care. It's a dumb thing to care about. Like in the article that those people were talking about, it also is completely moronic. It's dumb. It's a dumb article to care about. It's a dumb article to read. I tried to read it. I made it halfway through and I was like, this has nothing to do with comics. This is purely like just going like, I wish that like there was better stuff about superhero. Who cares? Why should there be?
Oh my gosh.
It's like when they do that thing about comics journalism, it's like they're not actually talking about like, hey, should there be better articles about like, I don't know, ethical choices being made? Should there be better articles about what that guy, that Ike Perlmutter guy at Marvel, like how much money he gives to Trump? Like, that's not what they're talking about. Like, they're going like, hey, should there be better, like a place that I can go and find out what's like really cool happening in Mr. Miracle?
Oh my gosh.
Like I think about that sometimes. Like, you know what? You know, be the worst job in the world is having to endlessly read press releases that are sent out by Marvel and DC. What a horrible job that would be. And you know what? That job should only be done by somebody who really fucking loves that stuff. Because anybody who's, I don't know, bright or interesting should not be forced to swim in that sewer for a long period of time. They shouldn't be. It just shouldn't be. That shouldn't be a job that anybody. That's heartbreaking. The idea that like there's some guy out there who's like, God, I'm really enthusiastic about my day, and you're like, you are? Check this out.
Here you go.
Oh god.
Here's all the IDW Transformers miniseries. We need you, and not just say here's the miniseries. Here's like the cover and 3 pages from every IDW Transformers miniseries. We need you to like write 17 articles about how these are coming out in July. Like that's
sad.
Yeah, that job shouldn't be done by somebody who's good or smart or happy. That should be done by somebody who only cares about Transformers comics. That's the only person who's right for that job. The only person.
Yeah.
And so Declan's like, that person should know things. Why should they fucking know things, Declan? Why should they?
What have you done to make it work?
Why should they? That's it. Yeah, I'm sorry. Why should they care? Why should they care? They shouldn't care. That's a stupid thing to care about. It's a stupid thing to write about.
Acting like most of the people that like even write comics criticism in the first place even know how to write a good article at all.
Yeah.
And then like comparing that to someone who wrote like something that like a bad article that was also like kind of criticizing whatever you're doing is ridiculous, just because it's like, well, there isn't like you haven't compared it to something that's like actual good criticism. You're just comparing it to like other like non-criticisms by like
it's
people that are fans.
So
or like,
ungrateful. It's just like on the part. Anytime those articles those kind of comments come out from like comics creators of a certain ilk, it's just so incredibly ungrateful, because it's like you're not even talking about. I mean, there are actual like the comics criticism that is being written in the New York Times needs to step up its game. That's just true. When there is comics criticism in those places, it needs to be better. It should be better. And they're not even talking about that. They're literally talking about blogs that have 74 unique hits a month. Like, go fuck yourself. You're so ungrateful, so incredibly ungrateful. And also it's like it's like, I mean, I've gone through that before with some of those people, and it's like, no, you're just turning on these guys who were nice to you for 4 years because they finally said, you know what? I think that the latest Wolverine versus Deadpool miniseries is pretty dumb. I think it's dumb, and I don't think I want to read it. I think it's stupid. And you're turning on them after 4 years of going like, you know what? I really like the Wolverine versus Deadpool miniseries. I really like it. I think it's really good. I think it's great. 5 stars. Like that's like, that's the truth of those articles.
Yeah, it's like people getting mad about it on Twitter is basically like they name search themselves and like saw someone talking shit about their comic, and then they're like, well, like comics criticism has really gone down the drain. And it's like, who gives a shit? Who like cares? Like, why are you reading it then? Like you should have already like admitted that you were doing a bad thing by like doing that in the first place. Like, why'd you even read it? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, like our friend Meredith, like she posted like a page of like Declan's, and it's just he literally like copy and pasted like the background like 3 times in a panel, and like Deadpool and Logan.
No, like the thing is like it's like the second panel was actually like different birds, but the third panel were the same birds from the first panel, so they like flew backwards.
Like, yeah, we really need to step up our game to be able to comprehend and like dissect this copy pasted page. Like.
So that's just that is. I think I made a subtweet about that, but I do think it's just one of. I actually no, I don't think I did, but it was just like these things are never actually about the people who are upset by them either. Like that. That I don't believe for a second that that Declan has read anything by Zainab Akhtar or he's read anything by Joe McCullough. I don't think that he's read anything that is in like a. I don't think he's read anything by Hillary Shute. I don't think that he has at all, ever. I think what he has read is he's read like really bad articles that are written in places like CBR, or he's read some quote from where somebody slagged off some friend of his that was written at maybe it was written at the comic show. I don't know. I don't know. But he has never read anything that is about that I would actually equate to be good comics criticism. But the reaction to like his comment is, I think immediately people think he's talking about actual shit that has value.
Oh yeah.
And it's like, no, he's not. Yeah. He's not. He's talking about some moron who wrote about some other dumb shit. Like, that's what he's talking about. He's talking about some crappy review of a Dark Horse miniseries or an Oni miniseries. That's what he's talking about. He's talking about something where somebody said, like, Rick Remender's pretty stupid. Like, that's what he's talking about. And then he's going like, yeah, oh, you might. They should be better. They're like, should they? I don't know. I guess. Who fucking cares? Like, why should they be better? Prove to me why they should be better. You have no argument.
He like perused Comic Book Roundup and just like, oh no.
He's like, how dare you? Let me like subtweet them.
Yeah, and then, you know, people like you, they don't write. It's like for years, like, people have said this thing where they're like, you know what, they don't talk enough about the colorist. And so now, like, one of the things that they bring up, and you read any stupid comics review, from some bonehead moron, where they always just like, all of a sudden they go like, what's really interesting is how they use blues in this. Oh, you know, blankety blank is like a real master of the scene. And you're like, yeah, were they? Is that fucking 74 blue when they picked that one in Adobe Photoshop? And then they right clicked and they said, yeah, all those, that'll be blue. There we go. What a genius they were. Mind blown.
Yeah, it's like, oh, the colors really made the comic, and they're like local colors, and the sky's blue and the grass is green. Like,
yeah, innovative. Good job. So right, and then like a comics artist or whatever reads that article and goes like, this guy gets it.
Oh.
Like, that's. I mean, I'm not going to say that like Dave Stewart isn't a good colorist. He is a good colorist. I'm not going to say Elizabeth Breitweiser isn't a good colorist. She's done some good stuff. But there is like there's a policy now where you just kind of go like, hey, Matt Wilson, who is just once again doing bang up work on Paper Girls, and you're like, really, what's great about it? The way that he uses pink. What? And I want to know. I want you to write it down. I'm not saying that he's not. I'm not saying that he's bad. But I'm saying like you have to do more than that. You have to say more than that. If you're gonna like it, but that's the thing is that no, that's not what Declan wants. What Declan wants is for you to just go like, Jordi Belair is really nailing it on the latest Brian Cook comic, where he like, you know, is like, hey, you wanna fuck me? Yeah.
Man, it's like the compliment circle jerk of Twitter.
Yeah, everyone politely acknowledged.
Everyone gets to like get off. But really vaguely.
I for one thing that like is always, because I've done everything except I've done basically everything except the one thing that I'm never going to do, which is I'm not going to write and draw comics. I'm never going to do that. It's never going to happen. I can make a promise. It's never going to happen. But I've done all this other stuff, and then I hear somebody who draws comics or write comics tell me about how they should be done or how they should be made, and I'm like, yeah, what the fuck do you know about like the Onyx feed? What do you know about your fucking Onyx feed? What are the bisects for your comics? Do you know any of that stuff? Because that actually can change your comic. Like, what are the comp titles for your comic? Do you know? Because that can determine whether or not your comic sells 300 copies in a year or whether or not it sells 15,000. Do you know any of that stuff? You don't. So don't tell me anything. So just shut up and focus on the thing you know about. Like, tell me how to draw a comic. Tell me how to take a script and solve the problem. Tell me how you, like, the things, because I want to know. I do want to know how a cartoonist goes, you know what, I'm going to have to draw this one character who's wearing this fucking Panama hat. I'm going to have to draw 200 pages of this Panama hat. And how did you solve that problem? How did you figure that out? How did you figure out how to draw a horse 70 times? From boring angles where the horse is like eating food and something. How did you solve that problem? That's what I want to know. But don't fucking tell me how to fix the industry, because you don't fucking know anything except your one little part. You only know your one little part. And I'm not saying that I know that much more, but the more I go into the job every day, the more that I do this stuff in retail, or that I do this stuff in distribution, or I do this stuff where I go to a library show, or I go to a fucking book trade show, the more I realize that there's all these people doing these things that people in comics don't know anything at all about. They don't even understand that that's happening. You know, I mean, like, I met this one guy when I first started working for No Brow. I took this trip to Chicago, and this one sales rep named John Meschak took me on a whirlwind tour all day. I was there for cake, but I went a day early, and he took me on all these bookstore visits. And his job was to go into these bookstores and sell a very specific list of publishers to these bookstores. And his job was to hand sell them based off, like, he went in twice a year to these places and sold stuff 6 months in advance. And it was these bookstores that had weird things in them. Like, that was like Chris Ware's favorite bookstore and that kind of thing. And it was like, that experience was one of the most amazing experiences of my life in terms of like how it fucking woke me up to go like, oh, this guy has been doing this in Chicago on his own for years. He's never been interviewed by CBR. He's never been talked about by any comics artist. They, most part, don't even know that he exists. But it is him who has gone into a place and said, hey, you should have 10 copies of this book by Tom Kaczynski, and they should be forward-facing. And that's how that book got out to real people. And so when I hear some comics creator tell me like how things should be done, I'm like, I'm sorry, do you even know who sells your books?
Yeah.
You don't. Because most of the time comics people, like, that's nothing. One of the things that actually annoys me and makes me viscerally angry is when I see comics people tell me how important like SPX is for their book. And I'm like, you know what? No, it's not. Because the deal is that if you're selling books at SPX, they have self-selected to such a point where those people were going to buy your book anyway. They're so in the fucking tank for you. Whereas these other guys are out there, and girls and all these other people, there's this whole community of people who do this stuff. And it's like, that's such a fascinating part of the industry to me. That's so interesting that thing is happening out there. What happens in some little fucking fan zone? I'm sorry, that just doesn't matter. It just doesn't, because it's going to happen anyway. It's going to happen anyway.
Yeah, that's how I've generally felt at conventions and shows in general. But I mean, I think that's kind of why, I feel like that's kind of why we're interested in talking to like retailers or people that work outside of our very limited experience of just making comics. That it's so interesting just because we don't know anything. And I'm like pretty okay with not knowing anything and having come into comics relatively late in terms of like thinking about it technically and thinking about sales and like books and genres. But I think, I don't know, it's interesting to have people like really worship certain shows like SPX or like TCAF as being like a certain way. And for the most part, like a lot of people going to those things were already going to go, and they were already interested in artists or like comics or like panels. And it's totally different from someone just walking into a bookstore and like walking around the aisles and wondering if they should pick up a graphic novel for the first time. But yeah, I don't know.
I think that mainly I can make it sound like I'm being specifically dismissive of a certain kind of person. I'm not really being dismissive of everybody. I'm just being dismissive of a kind of person. Basically, the mentality that like I've grown to be so frustrated by, and partly, and obviously, what's the core of this? The core of this is my general belief is like everybody wants to feel important. Everybody does, and that's totally normal. That's how we all feel. So a guy who draws comics, who draws Marvel comics, wants to feel that what he's doing is important. He wants it to be valued. So when he sees it being devalued or not being made important, he's going to respond in a certain way. I also feel that way because I'm like, there's all these people who are so amazing and are doing all this amazing work. And it's so incredibly dismissive to be like, you know what, if this is to just dismiss that their work entirely, and like librarians, that sort of thing. It's so dismissive to like act like what they do doesn't matter. And when you're placing such a premium on your own personal experience with the medium, what you're doing is dismissing all that other stuff. And so like, I try to remember that like, just because I don't understand something or I don't know how it works or I think it's boring doesn't mean that it doesn't have value. And I have to like check myself constantly. And like, but I think that like a lot of people do that. I think a lot, especially like people who get really deep into self-publishing kind of go like, all that other stuff doesn't matter. Like getting books out to trade reviewers or talking to mommy bloggers. That doesn't matter because it's not interesting to me. It's not sexy. It's not fun. It doesn't involve cool people that I like. You know, it involves like drudgery. It involves like what, Sloane was talking about with FIFA. It involves like putting shit in envelopes. It involves building relationships with people who are not ever going to be cool on social media. It involves and some of it, sometimes it does, but like it involves this whole world that people don't understand and it looks daunting. So they go like, oh, well, it just doesn't matter. I'm just going to focus on this niche part. And you're like, man, don't do that. Like, just go find the people that are, because like that guy that I talked about who took me around in Chicago to all those stores, and I saw his relationship and I saw how valued his word was when it came to comics, and how yet nobody in comics was talking to that one person. Like, there's so many people like that. I just happen to only know and be able to call out that one guy because he's the guy who took me around the day before Cake. But then there's all these people. There's Dory Dutton out in California. And she's the one who she goes to California museums and she figures out what graphic novel is going to really turn on the people who do some contemporary art museums bookstore.
That's crazy.
Those kind of people just exist out there, and we don't know anything about them. But they're amazing. Those are the soldiers for comics. And at the same time, you know what? None of those people are. I mean, that's not true. But a lot of times, none of those people are keeping up with whatever Twitter feed fight is going on. They don't know who They don't know which ones of the guys over at Loser City are actually have an interesting point of view and which ones are kind of goons. They don't know. They can't tell. And thank God that they don't, because you know what they have to do? They have to read 600 books every 3 months, then figure out which ones work, which ones don't.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's super cool that those people are out there. And we're
And luckily, they're all white men. Actually, no, that's actually totally untrue. That's the other thing is I go to all these when I hear all these talks about diversity and stuff like that, I'm like, yeah, you know what? There's a huge problem with diversity at Marvel and DC. You know where there's not a huge problem with diversity is librarians. Yeah. Not a huge problem. I mean, there is. That's totally untrue too. But when you go to a library show, you go oh, you know what? 90% women here.
Yeah.
There's no problem finding a bunch of gay and lesbian and trans librarians. Not a problem. And that doesn't mean that those scenes don't also have endemic problems with the patriarchy and all that other stuff. They do. They're part of America. They're going to have those kind of problems. But when you compare it in a place like Marvel or DC, you're oh, no, not at all. This is totally different.
Yeah, the varying degrees of things being good or bad.
Mm-hmm.
That's cool.
Mm.
I know, we've been talking for a while. Thanks for talking so long with us. I really appreciate it.
Well, yeah, I apologize. I apologize if I just kind of turned it into talking about my feelings, but I actually haven't. Tonight was my first night at the gym, so I'm a little wonky.
It happens. We're all kind of a bit tired today, so
yeah, we're all working out.
Yeah, I'm not myself. Not myself today.
I'm just full of muscle right now, so
yeah, I'm all muscle now, so I can't talk. But that's I think that's pretty good. I don't really I wonder what people are going to get out of this. I hope they get something.
I think they will. I think we
some insight about our thoughts about certain things. It's
the most. It could just be low grade unity. They can just bond with us over shit talking.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we did talk a fair amount of shit. This is probably the most times we've said shit on this podcast.
Yeah.
But I do think it's I feel there's a lot of things worth talking about that people just are not comfortable talking about. Mm-hmm. And I kind of want to break that down more and make it less bad. Just because it's not as bad as it seems. You can take criticism. You can have someone disagree with you, and it doesn't have to ruin your life. It doesn't have to mean they hate you.
Yeah, you can have the hard conversations and still come out the other side and kind of be okay.
Yeah, it's uncomfortable to have those conversations in any type of situation. But you should still have them just to have them. It's important for your growth and important for other people as well, and important to have done that in the first place. And if all of comics is just always going to be fluff and blurbs, then what's the point? Why would you even call anything, any article comics criticism if they're just glossing over everything that matters and everything that people really want to read or hear about or talk about?
Yeah, totally.
One thing I think it's my wife and I talk about this all the time because it's just comes up in our life all the time is the way that if the way that sometimes she'll point out to me maybe get off your phone for like a minute, or I'll say like, maybe get off your phone for a minute, like while you're talking to me or something like that. And the way we kind of react like so protectively, like almost like if you were like, hey, maybe you're drinking too much, and somebody's like, I'm not fucking drinking too much. How dare you talk to criticize how much I'm drinking? And you're like, God, I think I must have struck a nerve. You must like really be like worked up about that stuff. And like, that's how, like, if you're so worked up about it, maybe I am an asshole. Maybe I am being insensitive, or maybe there's a party that's already like, oh yeah, I don't know. Yeah. Maybe I should stop reading Declan Shelby comics.
Yeah. Like you kind of have to examine your own like reactions to things. I think it does help a lot. And if you're not going to do that, then I don't know, don't live in society, I guess.
I know. I feel like, especially with like cartoonists, like it's such a like lonesome, like isolated career that we're all in this like weird, like super egotistical headspace, and then we're like kind of shoved like a couple times a year in these like big conventions. And I don't know. I just find cartoonists have like a really insulated point of view sometimes.
Yeah, and you kind of have to have that like weird ego to be able to do this, because otherwise it doesn't seem worth it.
Yeah, but you have to like really buy into like your own like self. You're like fulfilling your own prophecy, and it's like that can make you like really crazy and weird. You're like, yeah, what I'm doing matters. Like,
yeah, so like I understand why people say those types of things, and they really grandstand about like their like morning routine or like their morning pages, as if it actually matters that much to other people, and other people act like it matters too. Like, go ask like, what pen did you use to draw this one page, or like what do you do in the morning, and like what warm up should I do to like draw like you? And it like obviously doesn't matter in like a real way.
Yeah,
but I see why people do it. It's just that I feel that there's this lack of people wanting to understand why anyone does anything at all, not just within comics, but in life.
I can't speak to, I shouldn't say anything when it comes to conversations about drawing, but I do kind of hear the same thing over and over again when I talk to people who are teaching comics. Because I've had to speak a couple of times that I've not had to. I've been given the opportunity. I mean, there is no greater opportunity than getting a chance to speak to people about comics. Like, that is, so I shouldn't describe it that way. But one thing here, whenever again, is like, and I think this is true in life too. It's like you want to find a shortcut around like the basic grunt work, and the basic grunt work is like, how do you get better at drawing? It's like, well, you just fucking draw. You just draw and draw and draw. It's like, well, how did you do that? It's like, well, I just did it for a long time until it wasn't so hard, or until I found a way to like endure the hardness. I found a way to like get through the boredom. And somebody's like, no, but like, what do you do in the morning so you can like not hate it? And you're like, I don't know. You just hate it. You just do it. I'm sorry, but like, drawing a lamp forever is not, it's always going to be the same thing. Like, you can like force yourself to like be like, well, that was a good lamp, but you're not, it's always going to be the same thing. It's always going to be the same thing. Or you just, you're like, I just decided to only do fantasy stories so that I never had to draw a cell phone again. Like, that's it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like, I think people are weird about it just because they can be. Like, they want to ask questions just because they can. And people are available for that, seemingly.
They think we have a secret.
Yeah, like no one's trying to hide. Well, for the most part, I don't think people are trying to hide something from you. I definitely think there are people that like convey a certain image to more impressionable artists, and that's kind of what I was getting at with like the fake positivity stuff earlier. Is that I felt it was like not genuine just because I felt that telling like younger artists certain things in certain ways can kind of enable like really bad habits, like, taking bad jobs and like making no money just because like you think it's better, or like drawing fan art just because you think that's going to get you like a million jobs. And like it might, but that shouldn't be like everyone's thing, and I don't think it can be. So it's like stuff like that where I feel like I don't really know how much it helps or how much it hurts, but I just find it to be like really boring and really redundant and doesn't actually say anything or do anything.
Yeah.
I like still get tons of questions about like.
So the moral of the podcast is fuck fan art.
Yeah. Like, you should do fan art if you want to do fan art, but don't do it because you want to draw like Miss Marvel.
Yeah.
And don't do it if you think Leslie's gonna be friends with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I won't.
Especially that.
Well, I don't know. It's just, don't do it because you want to impress other people. Just do it because you're horny for it. Like, that's the only reason why you would do anything.
Yeah.
Like, that's the only reason that I'll accept, is that, like, I can understand someone wanting to do something just because they think it's really hot. That's it.
Yeah.
like
The only excuse.
I'll come back after a while, and we'll come back and we'll just do 100% positivity. We'll just talk about our favorite things the whole time.
It's all good. Just
like the instructions for that day are don't work out. Don't work out before you
eat a cupcake. Yeah.
Yeah, eat a cupcake and like just be really happy and like don't talk shit about Stranger Things and like be good. Oh no! Why'd you have to put that out in the world?
Sorry.